Sparks that I don't remember. Hold and let it shine. Fix and start to fade away. Fix and start to fade away. Fix and start to fade away.
Hello, dear friends of Kabala International, once again with Mario.
Shalom, Nacho, how are you?
Shalom, Mario. Very good. Very good. Today we are going to develop the topic of unbalanced intelligence, which is another one of Bina's clipos. I wish we could talk about imbalances from an excess perspective, which can be represented in perfectionism, but also in the imbalance that can exist or that can be presented through the defect, as a manifestation of lack of control, of delirious experience about the structuring of reality.
Look, with respect to the first one, which is the issue of perfectionism, I also like to talk about a concept that is very interesting, which is the scrupulousness. Scrupulousness is a person who goes to the details, with the problem that details are infinite. So, since the details are infinite in fragmentation, someone meticulous can be so focused on a high level of detail that the overall picture gets lost. That's why Luzzatto, the great Italian Kabbalist, used to say, first, look at the general principles, and then consider the details, because people get lost in the details. When people delve into a topic, for example, in analysis, they start going so deep into the details that the larger theme, the general subject, disappears. That's why meticulousness has to be limited. How far are you going to go in the analysis of details? Because there can be a type of interpretation of reality that is subsuming you, inserting you, immersing you in, we could say, a reality. That Bina is trying to control it more and more. Be careful, with a good intention to understand it, because Bina, more than intelligence, is understanding. That is the real function of Bina, which is understanding. So people want to understand reality, but be careful, because in the details you are precisely losing understanding, because understanding comes first from comprehending the general principles. That being said, this perfectionism that can come from Bina directly influences the middle pillar of the tree of life, on Tiferet, which is the self. And instead of protecting it, as it has to be the function of understanding so that the self can understand reality, it can start sending self-demanding orders. So every time he puts the Bina self-demand, the Tiferet never feels at the level to which the Bina presses him. That is, the Tiferet is never 10. Of course, in the face of infinity, no one is 10. But the Tiferet has to have some compassion. The Bina sometimes, if unbalanced, is not compassionate. It sends a level of self-demanding that is almost close to sadism. It's like it gets excited from the pressure. The more self-demanding, it seems to enjoy it more. That's why Bina could even be considered sadistic, in the sense that it pressures you because you can, but it can lower the level of self-esteem of Tiferet to unsuspected levels. It can make the inner self drop to a terrible level. Also be careful, because Bina, in its perfectionism, loads you with guilt for not having reached where you were supposed to be. Because for Bina, you will never reach where you have to go. So, the difference between what one can do and what Bina expects, because we have to be compassionate, people do what they can, not what they want. People do what they want within what they can, within the limitations of what they can. So the Bina, if you put yourself in this plan where you ask the impossible. At the level of the Tiferet, of course, one thing is to stimulate you, and another thing is to put pressure on you. So, if there is a kind mother, a Bina, symbolically, where she stimulates you, you can do it, you get an 8 and she congratulates you, everything is fine. But if there is a Bina where you get an 8 and she tells you, I thought you were going to get a 9, of course the Tiferet is lowered. And she says, well, and when you got 9, you had to get 10. And when you got a 10, she doesn't congratulate you. It was the right thing to do. An imbalanced Bina is relentless. So, it doesn't motivate you. It demotivates you through self-pressure at a very high level of self-demand, thus lowering the possibility of self-esteem. The correct function of Bina should be to stimulate. I got an 8? Well done, son. I congratulate you for getting an 8. Do not come and say, I thought you had to get a 10. When that Bina is imbalanced, it always creates guilt because it's never enough for such a Bina. So we need to moderate ourselves, have compassion, and address this. We can't burden ourselves with guilt. Yes, responsibility. Responsibility and guilt are two different issues. I am responsible within my limitations, reaching as far as I can. I am responsible and compassionate at the same time. Responsibility should not lead me to the irresponsibility of hyper-responsibility. That is to say that the hyper-responsible is irresponsible because it does not setting a limit to responsibility regarding imperfection, regarding the compassion for imperfection. There must be compassion for the imperfect so that the demand for perfection does not push us to extremes. Therefore, on the other hand, we have what would be the klipa of Bina, the imbalance of Bina, from the lack, from the deficiency of a powerful Bina, from the disorganization. Many people throughout their lives invest a lot of energy, 50 years go by, and the person says, I haven't achieved anything. And the person who reaches this conclusion, who is a person who feels frustration inside for not having achieved something in life, many times it's not because they didn't exert force in life, it's because they didn't know how to organize where they had to go. This is the lack of Bina, because good Bina, good understanding, is the one that organizes me and somehow gives me structure in that order, allowing me to have a consciousness of progress in always transitory results, not definitive. We know that the process is infinite, but at least Bina structures me on transitory processes. That is, Bina tells me, okay Mario, in 2 years, I'll set the project to write this book or work on this doctoral thesis. And Bina has to work on my short-term and medium-term agenda so that the sense of the big goals can be fulfilled in that medium and short term. Nacho, there are very disorganized people in this world who have to learn to organize themselves. Spirituality is not a flow of energy where I'm lying on the beach and that's it. No, spirituality is a discipline. Spirituality is being highly disciplined. The person who wants to increase the levels of consciousness has to have discipline. If not, he doesn't get to increase the levels of consciousness.
One thing I jotted down yesterday that has to do with something I wrote to you a few years ago, which says that Bina is a hallucinatory mechanism, more or less controlled, necessary for subsistence in our existential state. So focusing a little bit on this situation of this hallucinatory process that Bina proposes to us.
Yes, sorry to interrupt you. I am laughing because you say partially hallucinatory.
A more or less controlled hallucinatory mechanism.
I think it is a hallucinatory mechanism.
Out
Absolutely.
of control.
Well, it is not controlled, no, but yes, by control,
More
yes.
or less.
Now that is completely hallucinatory. This is completely hallucinatory.
Totally.
What happens is that we have to act within the hallucination of our existence. We know that existence is a hallucination, but I have to do something with the hallucinated existence that I have.
In this sense, you mentioned the word that the Bina commands us, and I pointed out that it commands us with a tendency to deep understanding. It's a symptom of a balanced Bina. Why? In contrast to what you said about the scrupulous is related to the previous topic we were looking at, the topic of superficiality. The scrupulous person remains in superficiality. He cannot go deeper.
Well, the scrupulous person has a more serious problem than staying in superficiality. It's that they believe they are profound. That is to say, the scrupulous person has a double hallucination. Because
A hallucination of hallucination.
The scrupulous one thinks he goes deeper and then enters into details, believing that he is going deeper, but he is moving away from depth. That is to say, he is betting on superficiality on a larger scale, and he does not realize it. It is like the theorist that you see in an intellectual wave, the intellectual of the bar, that you see him meditative, and the guy is not meditative. He is not reaching the superficial. He is not able to see it. He's eating the intellectual persona that he thinks he's going deep, and all he's doing is surfing the surface, with all due respect. Because maybe over time, sailing on the surface, at some point he will acquire depth. So he may be in the process.
It depends on how you rotate the plane. If the shallowness is horizontal and you suddenly rotate it, it goes to depth.
That's why I say I'm not criticizing this intellectual man at the bar, because at some point they may manage to delve into the deep.
He can turn around.
As not everyone reaches the depth from birth. Many times in my classes I say, we weren't born discussing Aristotle.
No, when we were born, we departed from the profound.
So I say, therefore, in reality, depth is an increase in the level of consciousness and work that one has to do. The problem is that the scrupulous person convinces themselves that they are doing profound work when they are still staying on the surface. I see this a lot in universities. In universities, there are doctoral theses that you read, and when you finish the thesis, you say, but what happened here? It stayed on the surface and seemed to have entered into depth. First of all, why? First, because there is no thought from the doctoral candidate of the thesis. What exists is an intermingling of authors. So you find 400 pages of citations from different authors where there is no depth. What did others think? That is, we quote profound thinkers, and then we are superficial. So, if you take doctoral theses from the 30s or 40s, there are few citations because it is the work of the doctoral candidate in depth. Today, there are doctoral theses that can be created from citations of other authors, where the doctoral candidate or the one working on that thesis does not appear. They simply do not appear. Of course, this is not a work of depth. This is taking apparently profound ideas as if they were internalized by the one analyzing the situation, but they are not analysed. They are seated. Sitting is not integrating. Therefore, as George Steiner said, we are interglossing. That is to say, we are quoting each other, but no one reaches the depth.
Well, Mario, it is a pleasure to continue sharing with you this more or less controlled hallucination, and I hope we can continue, God willing.
Amen.